The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in March, and my sister's voice was so quiet I had to press the phone hard against my ear just to hear her. "Don't go to Asheville this weekend, Carol. Please, just trust me." I was standing at my kitchen counter in Raleigh, rolling out pie crusts the way our mother had taught us both 40 years ago. Flour on my hands and a pot of coffee going warm on the burner. I almost laughed. My sister had always been dramatic. Even as a little girl, she saw shadows where there weren't any. "Margaret," I said, setting down the rolling pin, "what on earth are you talking about?" She went quiet for a moment. Then, "I need to show you something. Can I come over tonight?" That was 31 years ago. I was 34. I thought I knew my husband the way you know a house you've lived in for years. Every creak, every draft, every comfortable worn spot. I was wrong about that completely. My husband and I had been married 6 years by then. He was a civil engineer, careful and methodical, the kind of man who alphabetized his bookshelf and kept receipts in labeled envelopes. We lived in a brick ranch house on a quiet street with a dogwood in the front yard. We had a golden retriever named Biscuit and a savings account and plans to renovate the kitchen the following spring. From the outside and from the inside too, or so I believed, our life looked solid, built to last. Margaret arrived at 7 that evening with a manila folder pressed under her arm and a look on her face I hadn't seen since our father was sick. She sat across from me at the kitchen table and didn't take off her coat. "I don't know how to start," she said. "Just start," I told her. She opened the folder. Inside were photocopies, bank statements, a photograph, 2 printed emails. She laid them out on the table one at a time, like she was dealing cards she didn't want to play. The photograph stopped my breath entirely. It was my husband at a restaurant I didn't recognize. Candlelight, white tablecloths. He was leaning across the table toward a woman with dark hair, and the way he was looking at her, I knew that look. I had seen it aimed at me once. "How did you get this?" My voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere across the room. Margaret worked as an office manager for a small insurance brokerage downtown. She explained it carefully, watching my face the whole time. A client had come in 2 weeks earlier to update a life insurance policy. His name was my husband's name. The beneficiary listed was not me. The woman at the restaurant was named Diane. She lived 40 minutes away in Durham. According to the policy documents, which Margaret had flagged as irregular and quietly photocopied before routing them to her supervisor, my husband had taken out a $2 loan. $4 million policy on my life 14 months ago. The beneficiary was Diane Holloway, listed as fiancé. Fiancé. I sat with that word for a long moment, fiancé, while married to me. "There's more," Margaret said. She didn't want to show me, but she did, because she loved me, and that's what love sometimes looks like, laying out the unbearable things so someone else doesn't have to face it alone. The emails were printed from an account I'd never seen. My husband had a second email address, and Margaret's colleague in the IT department, a young man who owed her a favor, had helped her access the header data. The emails were between my husband and Diane going back nearly 2 years. They were not ambiguous. Neither was this line, in an email dated 6 weeks earlier. "The mountain house weekend is set. I'll make sure she goes hiking. The trail near the ridge has no guardrail on the north side. People slip up there. It happens." I read it 3 times. Then I read it again. The mountain house. That was the Asheville trip. He had suggested it himself 2 weeks ago over dinner, said we needed time away, that the fresh air would do me good. I'd been tired lately, bone tired, the kind that coffee couldn't touch, and he'd been so attentive about it, bringing me tea every evening before bed, suggesting I see a doctor. Worried, he said. He was worried about me. I thought about the tea. Every night, for months, chamomile with honey, brought to me on the couch while I watched the evening news. I was usually asleep by 9. I had started setting 2 alarms because I couldn't trust myself to wake up from just 1. I had told my doctor I thought I might have a thyroid problem. She had run tests. Nothing came back. "He's been putting something in my tea," I said. Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. We sat in my kitchen for 2 hours that night, the folder between us and Biscuit asleep at my feet, and we made a plan. I had always been the steadier of the 2 of us, the one who didn't panic, who thought in straight lines when things went sideways. Margaret had always been the one who noticed things, who paid attention to small details that other people walked right past. She had noticed, and now I had to think. My first call the next morning was to my brother-in-law, Margaret's husband, who had retired the year before from 30 years with the Raleigh Police Department. He drove over at 8 in the morning, listened to everything without interrupting, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're not going to like what I'm about to suggest." "Tell me," I said. "You go on that trip. You go, and we make sure he doesn't get the chance to finish what he started." Margaret made a sound like she'd been struck. "Listen to me," he said, and he looked at me steadily. "If you disappear this weekend, if you cancel and don't tell him why, he'll know something's changed. He'll wait. He'll try again somewhere else, someday, when you're not expecting it. You need this to end, Carol, for good." He was right. I knew he was right, even before he finished the sentence. My husband was methodical. He had been planning this for over a year. A man like that doesn't stop. He adjusts. I went to work that Thursday as though nothing had changed, sat at my desk at the university library where I'd worked for 11 years, helped students find research materials, ate my lunch at my usual table by the window. I did not drink the tea that evening. I poured it down the bathroom sink while my husband was in the shower and rinsed the mug carefully. That Thursday night, Margaret's husband made phone calls. By Friday morning, he had reached a detective with the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office named Patricia Walsh. She was direct, thorough, and believed us immediately. She had worked 3 cases in the past decade that followed the same pattern. She called it a particular kind of crime, patient and domestic, and almost always planned by someone the victim trusted completely. Detective Walsh arranged everything in 18 hours. A wire, thin as a thread, fitted beneath the collar of my fleece jacket. 2 deputies positioned in the tree cover on either side of the trail my husband had described in his email. Margaret and her husband parked on the access road with a radio and strict instructions not to move unless they heard the signal. I packed my weekend bag Friday evening the way I always packed, methodically, folded clothes, toiletries in a zip bag, a book I wasn't going to read. My husband moved around the kitchen making dinner, cheerful, talking about the drive up, the restaurant he'd found in town, how good it would be to get away together. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder. "You've seemed so tired lately," he said. "This is exactly what you need." "I know," I said. "Thank you for thinking of it." The drive to Asheville was 2.5 hours. He played a radio station he knew I liked and stopped at a gas station when I said I wanted something cold to drink. He paid for it himself, came back with the bottle already open, handed it to me. "Here you go." I pretended to drink, set it in the cup holder, pretended to drink again when he glanced over. The mountain house belonged to his company. A company retreat property, he'd always said, available for employees. Nice enough, wood siding, a wraparound porch, a stone fireplace backed up against the ridge. I had been there twice before and loved it. The irony of that sat with me the whole drive up. We arrived in the early evening. He built a fire and opened a bottle of wine, and we sat on the couch the way we used to sit years ago. His arm around me, the fire crackling. He told a story about a job site in Greensboro, something funny that had happened with the surveying crew. I laughed in the right places. I watched his face in the firelight and tried to find the stranger in it. I had loved this man. That was the part that no one outside of it can ever fully understand. Not the fear, not the anger, but the particular grief of sitting next to someone you loved and realizing the person you loved had never existed, or had existed once and dissolved into something else while you weren't watching. I didn't know which was worse. He brought me tea before bed, chamomile. Set it on the nightstand with a small smile. I thanked him. I waited until the bathroom door closed and poured it into the potted plant on the windowsill. I heard him on the phone at 2 a.m. He thought I was asleep. I'd made sure my breathing was slow, and even when he got up, through the wall of the small bedroom, I could hear his voice, low and controlled. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "early, before there are other hikers. I'll suggest it. I already told her the view from the North Trail is worth it." A pause. I know. After this, everything changes. Another pause. Longer. "I love you too." He came back to bed and lay down beside me in the dark, and I stared at the ceiling and thought about the dogwood tree in our front yard. I had planted that tree. I had dug the hole myself. In the morning, he made eggs and toast and suggested the hike the way he'd planned it, casual and warm, pulling on his boots at the door. Beautiful morning. Clear sky. We should go before it gets crowded. I laced up my own boots. The wire was in place. My hands were steady. The north trail was narrow, climbing through rhododendron and bare oak, the kind of path that feels remote in 15 minutes. My husband walked ahead of me, pointing out the view as it opened through the trees. He was good at this, the easy comfort of it, the naturalness. I had thought for 6 years that his ease came from contentment. Standing on that trail in the cold mountain morning, I understood it came from somewhere else. He was simply a man who found things easy that should not have been easy. The ridge appeared through the trees. The drop on the north side was steep, unmarked, the kind of edge that looks approachable until it isn't. I had been to this spot before and thought it was beautiful. He had brought me here before, knowing what he was planning. I thought about that. He moved behind me. I felt the shift in his position, the way he came close, slightly off to the left. "Look at that," he said, his voice easy and warm, and put his hand on my shoulder, and then, "Patricia," my own voice, calm and clear, the signal word. He froze. In the next 4 seconds, I stepped to the right and turned around, and the 2 Buncombe County deputies came out of the tree cover, and Detective Walsh's voice came from below on the trail. And my husband stood on that ridge with his hand still half extended and his face going through 4 different expressions before it settled into something I recognized. Calculation. Even then, even caught, he was calculating. "You're making a mistake," he said to me, not to the deputies, as though we were still just the 2 of us, and this was a disagreement he could manage. "No," I said, "I really am not." They arrested him on that trail with the valley spread out below us, and the sky overhead very blue and very cold. I sat on a rock and watched them do it and felt something move through me that I still don't have a clean word for. Not relief exactly, not joy, something more like the sensation of a pressure you'd forgotten you were living under, suddenly releasing all at once. Margaret was at the access road. When I reached her, she put both arms around me and held on without saying anything, which was exactly right. The investigation took 4 months. Forensics confirmed a sedative compound in residue from my mug at home. He'd been careful, never too much, just enough to keep me foggy and slow and compliant. Financial records showed he'd moved $300,000 into a joint account with Diane over the prior 18 months. Diane herself, when detectives interviewed her, was genuinely devastated. She had believed my husband was a widower. He had told her his wife had died 3 years ago in a car accident. She had been grieving a woman who was alive and drinking coffee 2 towns over. Diane and I have never met. I don't know if we ever should, but I have thought about her often over the years. Another woman handed a story that wasn't true by the same careful, patient man. He pleaded not guilty and took it to trial. His attorney argued I had staged the whole thing, that I was the one who had wanted the marriage to end and had constructed an elaborate setup to destroy him. He said it with confidence. He was a very good attorney, but Margaret's insurance documents were dated before any of this began. The wire recording from the trail was clean and clear. The sedative in my mug had no legitimate explanation. The emails were authenticated, and Diane, sitting in that courtroom, told the truth with quiet devastation that no jury could look away from. 7 days of deliberation, guilty, attempted murder, fraud, and criminal poisoning. The judge sentenced him to 22 years. He's been out 4 years now. Early release, good behavior, the prison system's estimation of a man I had once known in a different way. He lives in Tennessee. I receive notifications as a victim, a formality that arrives in my email and that I close without reading the details. I retired to Boone, up in the North Carolina mountains, which people sometimes find surprising. Why would I come back to the mountains? But it wasn't the mountains that tried to kill me. It was a man who had used a beautiful place as a backdrop for something ugly. I refuse to let him have that too. The Blue Ridge is mine. He doesn't get that. Margaret and her husband drive up to visit 3 or 4 times a year. We sit on my porch with coffee and watch the light change on the hills, and sometimes we talk about it and sometimes we don't. She turned 63 this past October. I made her the pie crust recipe, the one I had been rolling out that Wednesday afternoon when she called me. She cried a little and pretended she hadn't. My daughter, I raised her after the divorce, a whole story of its own, called me last spring and asked if I ever thought about what would have happened if Margaret hadn't noticed. If she'd let it go, decided it wasn't her place, told herself she was probably wrong. I think about it more than she knows. The specific, ordinary courage of a person who decides to speak up anyway, who sees something wrong and doesn't convince herself it's probably nothing. My sister was not a detective. She was an office manager who noticed an irregular policy document and had the quiet, stubborn bravery to follow that thread all the way to my kitchen table. Children notice things adults dismiss. Siblings notice things spouses miss. The people who love us and stand slightly outside the story we're living inside, they can sometimes see the shape of it more clearly than we can. I spent a long time angry. At him, at myself, at the years I'd spent trusting a performance. But anger is a place to pass through, not a place to live. What I carried forward from all of it is something smaller and more useful. I listen now. When someone I love says something feels wrong, I don't explain it away. I sit down and I ask them to tell me everything. And I make sure I never pour my own tea. If you're listening to this and something in your life doesn't add up, the tiredness that makes no sense, the trips that happen like clockwork, the small inconsistencies you keep explaining away, please stop explaining. Pay attention. Trust the person in your life who pulls you aside and hands you a folder and says, I need to show you something. That person is trying to save you. Let them.